Okay, folks, gather around. Gather around. We might make a start. Please feel free to help yourself to some food and then come and grab a seat. If you need to go and get some refills during it, feel free to do that as well. Hey, nice to have you all here at our research presentation for the Lifestyle Medicine Health Research Centre. As you know, each of the research centres have 2 of these each year. And so this is the first of ours. And the next one in the second half of the semester will be even better because Brett will be doing it. But my name's Darren. I'm doing the presentation today. I'm the director of the Lifestyle Medicine Health Research Centre. So I'm sort of introducing myself. This was my opportunity to say really cool things. But I thought, oh, that's probably not appropriate. I was going to get my wife to say a few things, but I thought that could be really bad. So I think I know most of you. And if not, my name's Darren. I've been here at Avondale for a long time. Not as long as Rob. What are you up to now, Rob? 88. Well, I came in 93. No, 94. Spring chicken. That's exactly right. So, hey, really nice to be here and be able to present to you. And I'm presenting a topic. I don't know. Probably the best way to describe this. I feel like I'm in my swimming pool, but I'm getting outside my lane often. And so for that, I pray for forgiveness and I pray for guidance as well and seek your counsel. And so I really wanted this to be a springboard for thinking about a new idea. And what I would love is input from you. So there'll be a little bit of opportunity at the end to provide me with some counsel and feedback. But also after, if you've got some other ideas, I'd love to hear about them. So really, this is going to be very multidisciplinary in its approach. And normally what I would be presenting on is some research data that we've collected and presenting some statistics because I'm sort of come from a quantitative background. But this is completely left field for me. So really, I'm presenting a thought experiment, a thought idea. Would love your feedback on that. And then we're looking at rolling this into a research project as well. So with that said, let me start. So I've called this the case for enough. I was reading this the other day. So you know that the 1800s were a time of great sort of, I suppose, a renaissance almost in health thinking. And there were some key health reformers that came along, Coles and a number of others, but Alan White was one of these. And it was a real time when we started to reimagine and rethink the whole idea of health and wellbeing and what it was. And anyway, I've read this so many times before. This is out of a book that she wrote in 1905 called Ministry of Healing. And it says, pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, use of water, trust in divine power. These are the true remedies. And they've sort of become, I suppose, some of the pillars of this thing called lifestyle medicine, which, interestingly enough, probably wasn't needed to the extent that it is today, back in 1905. But I read this, and then all of a sudden I went, wait a second, let me read this again. And I locked onto this word here, abstemiousness. And I thought, wait a second, because you know what? I've been in the wellbeing space for over 3 decades, doing research and all the rest of it. And all the other things I've done a lot of work in, like, nutrition and exercise and stress and rest. And I love the fact that even at this, over 100 years ago, she included environmental aspects in here, pure air, sunlight. I'm all over that stuff. And then I thought, what's this word? I haven't taken a deep dive into this. And this whole idea of abstemiousness. And I have become captivated by this. And I'm actually doing a whole lot of head miles, and it's sending me on a whole lot of different rabbit warrens. And I have come to think and believe that maybe this is perhaps even the most important pillar of lifestyle medicine, of health and wellbeing. And let me explain, and I'm going to build a case for it as we go through. So, by definition, first of all, what is this thing called abstemiousness? And pretty much what it relates to is this whole idea of moderation, of temperance, of balance, of restraint. And there's sort of 2 domains, and we tend to lock into the idea of it means abstinence and avoiding things which are harmful. So don't smoke, all that sort of stuff. But the bigger part of it is actually this whole idea of balance, right? And avoidance of the excess, probably at the heart of it. And so this is the word that just features for me and keeps coming up in my mind and resonating time and time again. My way of capturing it is enough. And so I want to tell you and share with you a story about enough. And I would love your insights as we go through. So given that this is a story, I've even arranged it in chapters. Okay, so here we go. And it's going to be very multidisciplinary. I'm going to be drawing from a whole lot of lanes that maybe I shouldn't be, lanes that you are experts in that I'm not. And so once again, this is why I'd love your input in this. But I want to start with this. Chapter 1, when enough isn't enough. So I'm actually going to commence by leveraging off and acknowledging the work here of Professor Gary Egger, who's an epidemiologist, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but he's sort of a father of lifestyle medicine in Australia. He's certainly a really good friend of mine and a mentor to me. But he actually created this model, and I've adapted this somewhat. But this was published some time back now. But I would love to commence by running this thought experiment with you. Right? We're going to talk about the health of people, or more importantly, the ill health of people today. And what we know is that we have, humanity not doing so great with regards to their health outcomes. We have this disease state, this what we'd call biological pathology. And today, the predominant cause of human sort of morbidity and mortality, I would say worldwide, globally, would be chronic diseases. Brett's maybe giving me the side eye already. But what we do know is that, if we look at over the past 150 years ago, we have seen what they call the epidemiological transition. So, going back early in the 1900s, most people would have died from acute conditions like infections, pathogens, accidents, injuries, things that came on very quickly. Today, the predominant cause of death and disability are these things that come on slowly, these chronic conditions. So heart disease, still the number one killer today. Even during COVID, heart disease was still the number one killer. So we're running a thought experiment, right? That the key contributor to the poor health of people today is chronic disease. So epidemiologists love to ask questions. They want to know the why, and they want to know what's the cause of that and what's the cause of that. So you're going to help me here. So if this, the poor health of people, the prime cause of suffering is this biological pathology, these chronic diseases. Let's just stay in that space for a moment. You're going to ask me, what's the cause of that? Well done. You're all quick as gazelles through the desert. Yes, that's right. You'll get the idea as we go. Okay, so great question. And I'm glad you asked it, right? What is the cause of that? Well, what we know is that there are these biometric risk factors, okay? And these biometric risk factors are things like obesity, high cholesterol, insulin resistance. Collectively, they've been referred to as metaflammation, right? So these are inflammatory responses within the body, right? Metaflammation. But epidemiologists would ask the question, thank you, Linda. All right, everyone, you're going to get the idea of this. By the time we get to about number 8, we'll all know what we've got to do. Okay, so thank you for asking what's the cause of that. What we know the cause of these biometric risk factors are things like overnutrition, right? Inactivity, high levels of stress, distress. However, epidemiologists and you would ask the question, well done, team. We're getting there. All right. What we actually know, it's the modern lifestyle. So the modern lifestyle, which really has revolutionarily changed from the Industrial Revolution, started to drive all of these things. The way that we move, the way that we eat, the way that we stress, which then leads to these biometric risk factors, and then these disease states, how they manifest. And collectively, we talk about these as proximal causes, medial causes, and then, however, epidemiologists could look for the distal cause. And so they would ask the question, what's the cause of that? And what we know, this is quite well established in the epidemiological literature, that the root cause of the poor health of people, if we look at it from the context of chronic disease, is actually economic growth. Isn't this interesting? Economic growth drives the poor health of people. Okay, hold that thought for a moment, because we're going to run the exact same thought experiment with the planet. Okay, so here we have, instead of biological pathology, let's talk about ecological pathology, right? The earth is groaning, right? We see manifestations of that right now. And from an epidemiological perspective, you could ask, Jason, you should be asking, I didn't see your lips move then. You are the ecologist here. I'm stepping outside my lane, and so don't sort of look at me like that. But you know what we can say, just as in the human body, we have these biometric risk factors, we actually have these ecometric risk factors, right? And these are things like, just like we have, high cholesterol levels, we have high CO2 levels. We have things like global warming, climate change. We collectively, within the human body, they'll sometimes talk about this metaflammation, inflammation of the biological system. This is ecoflammation, right? Like an inflammation of the environmental space. Epidemiologists could ask, what's the cause of that? Well, we actually know in this, you can see that how this mirrors the human experience. It's things like not overnutrition for us, but overproduction, right? It's stressing the resources collectively. In 2025, by July 24, we'd already used that year's worth of resources, right? We're stressing the resources of the planet. Pollution, there's all of these things. So we can see a similar pattern emerging. And epidemiologists would ask, what's the cause of that? It's the modern lifestyle. And what's the cause of that? It's economic growth. And so we actually have there's this nice, well-established framework. I'm not getting into innovative stuff yet, but there's this nice framework which demonstrates that economic growth actually drives downstream the poor health of both people and the planet. And if you want to see, and this is why the health of people on the planet is so intimately connected. I'll show you just one case in point. This sort of stuff that intrigues me. Do you know that we're actually seeing an increase in weight gain amongst animal species, all animal species? Okay, and you think, oh, wait a sec. Okay, we know there's definitely, and this is well documented, there's a relationship between obesity rates of pets and their owners, right? And that would make sense. If I'm not walking, I'm probably not going to walk my dog either. But even in wild animals, even in animals within laboratories that have food ad libitum, they can eat whenever they feel like, we're actually seeing weight gain amongst that. And so the question there is, well, what's happening there? Well, and we're seeing weight gain in humans. We've seen that, very much so in the past 30 to 40 years. Well, what's the one thing we are doing all in common? We're breathing the same air. Well, did you know that if you go to increasing altitude, you tend to see weight loss? Why is that? I'm not going to get into the physiology of it all, but pretty much what happens is, as the pressure of air decreases, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide decreases, and that actually affects the appetite regulation center in our brain, so we don't feel like we want to eat as much. This is why if you go to altitude, like if people are doing, base camp assaults and all the rest of it, they have to force feed themselves because you don't feel like eating. So if reduced partial pressure of carbon dioxide causes loss of appetite and weight loss, what would increasing partial pressures of CO2 do? And so there's now a novel hypothesis that the increasing concentrations of CO2 in our atmosphere is actually driving our appetite regulation, and we're wanting to consume more. And if, in case you're a naysayer, I actually looked it up last night, that the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today is 430 parts per million. In 2022, when I previously looked it up, it was 422. Right, so this is, for thousands of years, we haven't seen CO2 levels above 300, and yet in the past, sort of couple of decades. And what's intriguing, if you look at how atmospheric CO2 levels correlate against obesity trends within the United States, similar looking curve, isn't it? Right, so that's just a little diversion, but the point is this. What we know is there's this intimate connection between the health of people and the planet. Right? And what's the root cause of that? It's economic growth is driving this. Isn't this intriguing? And we could talk about economic theory and all that space. That's another chapter that we're not going to go down to now. But here is where I get interested because, and I'm stepping once again outside my lane into lanes that some of us are definitely inhabiting. And that is, secular epidemiologists stop here with their questioning. But from a faith tradition, we could ask a further question. And what is that question? What's the cause of that? It's something about us. It's something about the human condition that actually wants more, wants bigger, wants better, wants excess as compared to enough. And you know what? This is where I find this is, from a multidisciplinary perspective, this is where we see some of the stories, the biblical narrative starting, and other faith traditions as well, warning us against this. right? Isn't this is what I find intriguing? The original story is basically one where God puts humans in a garden. What's a garden symbolic of? Abundance, life, growth. You can have it all. You can have all of this, just not that one. And we go, yeah, I think we like that one. Right? And he goes, well, here's the warning. Right? Here's the warning. You go that path and it will go bad for you. In fact, ultimately, it'll kill you. And I think the you is not just human you. I think it's a collective creation you. People and the planet just implode. Things go really bad. So, what happens when enough isn't enough? Things go bad for us. Isn't this interesting? So, chapter 2. Well, why do we crave it so much then? What is it that why are we drawn to this thing called enough? And I came across this the other day, and I love this. Right, this is Winnie the Pooh. Okay, and here's Piglet speaking to Pooh. He says, "Supposing a tree fell down, Pooh, and we were underneath it." "Supposing it didn't," said Pooh, after careful thought. Piglet was comforted by this. Isn't this intriguing? But you know what? Here's the interesting thing. What we know is what separates us humans from other species is our ability to imagine what could be, right? To actually look ahead. And what we know is that worry. The beauty of that, what comes with that, is this incredible ability of humankind to create and dream and do amazing stuff. We do brain surgery on people. We put people on the moon, like unbelievable stuff. But with that ability to imagine the good also comes the ability to know the evil. And once again, that original biblical story. Hey, you know what? Take that path and you'll know good and evil. Right? And what happens with we have this ability to look ahead and imagine not what could go right, but what could go wrong. And it's been said that worry is the greatest cause of human suffering. Isn't this interesting? And so, I find this paper interesting. Actually, they looked at people's worries and they got them to document them, and then they followed them up to see how they manifest. You know what? Less than 6% of what people worry about actually transpired in their particular studies. And for most people, none of their worries actually came to transpire in this particular study. But nonetheless, that ability to worry, worry, will there be enough? Will there be enough? Manifests in us wanting to gather, right? And once again, we pull in one of the biblical accounts of this story of manna, right? Basically, this is the story of God saying, I'll care for it, right? I'll feed you. I know you're in the desert, right? You're sort of pretty, desolate here, but I'll feed you. And every morning when you wake up, there's going to be food on the ground. Go grab some. What's our instant first response? You know what? I'm not worried about today. Well, I am worried about today, but I'm worried about what could be and when this could go bad. And so our automatic response is to gather. So why do we crave more than enough? Why do we crave excess? Part of it's to safeguard. Part of it's a future proofing. Right. So this is really well documented. But there are other reasons as well. The other reason is the myth of more, I call it, or the more myth. You see, what we humans tend to do is confuse quality of life with standard of living. Right? And they're very different things. We know that you need a certain amount to experience a good quality of life. Right? If you're really hungry, you don't have shelter, this sort of stuff, it's hard to experience high quality of life. But beyond that, we actually know that financial gain doesn't have much of an impact on people's, happiness levels at all. And it can actually be a negative. Right? I'll give you a simple case study of this. My car, I've got a Toyota Prado 2009 model, which makes it, 17 years old now, something like that. What's that? But you know what? I love my car. You know what? I'm into foil surfing at the moment. And my car is such that I can leave the mast attached to my board and just fit it in the back there and then drive away, right? It's a beautiful thing. I went to the beach with my friend the other day who's got a latest model, Toyota Prado, right? And we're driving along and I'm thinking, it's nice in here. This is real good. And then I start thinking, more is better. This is great. And then we get to the beach, right? And he says, oh, yeah, no, we have to take all the stuff off because otherwise it doesn't fit in because the seat's packed down. And I go, that's a bit of a... And then he goes, what am I doing with my keys? They're these push-button keys and they can't be close to the car. So I have to hide them in the sand somewhere that no one's looking. And the whole time he's out there, he's stressed because is someone going to find my keys and take... You know what my car has? It's a silver thing that you turn and I put in my wetsuit pocket and I never give it another thought. And so, you know what? I actually have something that people would say is a lower standard of living in terms of my vehicle, but it actually creates a higher quality of life for me. Because get this, your quality, this is what the research indicates, your quality of life is determined by the quality of the emotions you experience. And all the things that we have, they are actually just channels to different emotions. If they're good emotions, yes, they're wings. They contribute to your quality of life. If they're bad emotions, like stress that someone's going to flog your car, they actually detract from your quality of life. And yet we get suckered into this for some reason. There's this myth of more. We think that the more we have, better standard of living, my quality of life will be better. That's not the case. It's a myth. And then there's the whole hedonic adaptation thing that I'm sure that the psychologists would be able to tell us a whole lot more. I learned to hang glide about 25 years ago. Went down to the beach, went on a sand dune. And when you first hop in a hang glider and then you run down a sand dune with the wind blowing up and it starts to take off the ground and you go, whoa, and first you moonwalk and the next thing you are like off the ground and it is unbelievable. And I remember, I had this distinct memory of thinking, I could do this for the rest of my life, right? It was so much fun. And you know what? After about half a dozen of those, all of a sudden I'm looking around if there are higher sand dunes anywhere. Where are the higher highs? Where are the higher hills? And we know that we humans have this hedonic adaptation, right? That latest phone that you just got, the latest car you just got, the latest whatever, the greatest. Yeah, this is so good for about 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden, oh, there's a new one out. Oh, this is rubbish. Like, how was I ever happy with that? Like, and so with this thing called the hedonic adaptation. My hang glide, and you know what? This I'm ashamed to admit this. I got into hang gliding, started hang gliding, loved hang gliding, right? I had this hang glider. And then one day I was out and I watched, and someone had this other hang glider that was faster than mine. And I thought, I can't even keep up with them anymore. So guess what happened? That you know what happened. I had two hang gliders pretty soon, but then another model came out, right? And it was faster still. I shouldn't be confessing. My wife knows this anyway. So hey, guess how many hang gliders I wound up with? 3 hang gliders, right? So all of a sudden now, instead of tying one hang glider on my roof to go to the beach, I'd have 3 hang gliders on top there. It took me a lot longer. I'd get to the beach, then I'd second guess which one I should actually fly. Then I'd go and fly it, and because you can only fly one at a time, and I'd be thinking, oh, I probably should have done the other one. And yet, when I had just the one, I was happy. It was simple. I love this thing. And so I actually vowed and declared after that sport, that's it, enough. And Jason's laughing. So now my latest sport, and Jason's the same. So don't you look at me that way. I get into surf foiling, right? These foils, and it's unbelievable sport. This is a photo that Jim, my next door neighbour, took of me yesterday. How many foils are in my hand? I've got 3 again, right? Why? Why do I do this? Why is it that we constantly crave this? That one there, I use that 99% of the time, right? But that one's a bit faster, and that one there, you can do other stuff on it. And then we proliferate. And all of a sudden I go, why did I do this all over again? Right? It's this insatiable drive that we have. So there's that hedonic adaptation. And then last of all, why do we crave enough? Or why do we crave more than enough? Is that because we just like stuff. Right? We humans like stuff. And the research shows that we actually especially like more stuff than others. 1974, what they actually found is that if you look at countries, very poor countries, happiness metrics are a little bit lower, right? Until they get to a certain standard of living. Higher income countries, have the opportunity to have higher levels of happiness. And within a country, people who are more wealthy tend to be slightly happier than those people that are less. The haves slightly happier than the haves not, unless it gets excessive. Then, if you watch over time, as gross wealth increases, everyone's wealth goes up. Do you know what? Happiness doesn't change. In fact, sometimes it goes down. And what's this telling us? What it's telling us is that it's not that having more stuff is actually driving the happiness. It's having more stuff than others is making us feel happier. Right? And so we're set up for this. We're actually geared. It seems the reason we crave is because we crave more than the other people. And I could tell you more stories than that. But you know, the book Clive Hamilton, sorry, and Richard Dennis, affluenza. And this is how they define affluenza. And I like that term. Brett, I've sort of plugged a little bit of an infectious aspect in there. But affluenza, the painful, contagious. So these are the words I wanted you to hone in on. Contagious, socially transmitted condition of overload, debt, anxiety, and waste resulting from the dogged pursuit. This is affluenza. Who has affluenza? I realize I've got affluenza, right? And unless I check myself, and even then it doesn't work often, but you know, this whole idea of what is enough? What is enough? How much is enough? Chapter 3. What's here, I get back into my lane just for a little while, okay? How much is enough? Within the lifestyle medicine space, what we actually see is that physiologically there is an enough. Okay, and we see this certainly with nutrition. And I'm calling this the Goldilocks zone, right? That you can have too little and too much. So when it comes to nutrition, we know that to be the case, right? Not enough food, problematic. Too much food, problematic. What I think is an absolute tragedy is that from 2011, for the first time in human history, we live in a world where more people die from the ill effects of overweight than underweight, right? The ill effects of too much excess as compared to not enough. And what is most diabolically, you know, tragic about that is that doesn't need to be the case if we spread things around. Nonetheless, so nutrition, there's a sweet spot, isn't there? There's a Goldilocks zone. And we see even within, and this is my frustration with nutrition research, is that researchers are never happy to know, oh, carrots are good for you. What they want to know is, oh, what is it in carrots that's good for you? Oh, well, there's beta carotene in carrots. So let's grab heaps of that stuff and let's dose people up, like, because if a little bit's good, then a lot's going to be great. And, you know, this is just one case where they ceased the clinical trial, because when you start to put things, even good things, in excess, become toxic and actually mount and cause, you know, these other problems. So within nutrition, you know, physiologically, there's a Goldilocks zone. We see the exact same thing with sleep duration, right? And you know, the sort of the systematic reviews and sort of the meta-analyses that indicate that, yeah, that sort of, you know, 7 to 8.5-ish hour zone, that's great. You go shorter than that, that's problematic. You go longer than that, that's problematic too. In fact, in some of these studies actually suggest that long sleep is worse from a mortality perspective than short sleep. But you know what it's hinting at is there's a Goldilocks zone. And what I will also say, it's different for different people. You know, so that question is what is enough, right? It's different for different people. Same with nutrition, right? Some people can eat like a horse, right? And that's the way they function. Others not so. Right, so it's very much an individual thing. We look at stress levels, right? This is diving into the psychology. This is well documented back from 1908 when Yerkes and Dodson first published this inverted U hypothesis, mapping the relationship between performance and arousal level. And what we know is that under stimulation, if you don't have any stress in your life at all, you're actually very unproductive. You're bored, right? And however, as you transition, you get into this little sweet spot, this Goldilocks zone for you, where it's the right amount of arousal, the right amount of stimulation, and then you go too far though, and it moves into not stress but distress, and things start to fall apart again, and we're unproductive. We drop the ball on all these things we can't process as well. And so once again, this is hinting at, from not just our physiology, but our psychology is geared that there is a Goldilocks zone. And once again, this is different for different people. We all know people who can carry incredible loads and seem to thrive on having their hair on fire. Whereas others, they need to moderate how much stress they have in their lives to a much greater extent. So how much is enough? Well, our physiology and our psychology hints that there's a Goldilocks zone, there's a sweet spot, but it's different for different people. Even social media use, we think, social media use bad. Yes, that's a blunt answer. Well, problematic social media usage. This is the term we're talking about now, PSMU. That's the problem. If it's excessive. Down here, none of it. That might be a bit of a problem living in the culture that we live in as well today. So there's this happy spot. This is the one that encourages me greatly. This is just released 2026, looking at exercise. Can you get too much exercise? What do you think? Yeah, they actually found they've always thought there's this J shape. Obviously too little exercise, not good. Too much exercise, they're saying that's when it becomes pro-inflammatory, and you have these other complications as well. And you know what? The truth be told, that probably is the case. However, this particular study, I love it. This is bad practice, isn't it? I found this study I like. I'll just hone in on this one. This didn't see the same sort of deleterious effects at the top. But nonetheless, what this is showing is that there's this Goldilocks zone. And what is really interesting when we look at the exercise research, which is once very much my lane, is that we actually know that if you put people on an exercise program, some respond amazingly, some won't respond at all. There have been trials done where they put people on an activity program and they go backwards. Happy day. Hey, thanks for that. But they don't respond to that, but they do respond to this if you change the format. So once again, it's pointing at this in answer to this question, how much is enough? Well, it's different for different people, right? What's your enough? And this is where I'm going to culminate with shortly. What's your enough? Right, this is the question I really want to emerge from this research. Chapter 4, enough is enough. I see in many areas people starting to ask this question. I actually think what we're seeing is a kickback, and this is getting right out of my lane, but into political affairs. I think we're seeing a pushback against unbridled capitalism, and people are saying, you know what, may have worked for a period of time, but indefinite economic growth, we knew from day dot, is not a feasible option on a planet with limited resources. Okay, so what's the alternative? And to their credit, this was message from the Catholic conferences. This is basically the southern, the global south leaders got together and they issued this statement. And you know what? I'm going to read this because I was actually really moved by it. I think it's incredibly touching. It says this call to action, this white paper, it invites us to adopt a new lifestyle marked by joyful simplicity. This change involves personal, community, cultural, and value transformation that cuts across political and economic structures. Read this. Such sobriety, when lived freely and consciously, is liberating. It's liberating. Having less can be liberating. I think, I don't know about you, but I know this to be from personal experience, I know this to be the case, right? It can be liberating to have less, right? A lot less stressful. It's not a lesser life or one lived with less intensity. On the contrary, it's a way of living life to the full. John 10:10, right there. And I love this. Get this. Happiness means knowing how to limit some needs which only diminish us. Right? And I think I'd change one word in that. I would say happiness means knowing how to limit some wants which only diminish us. So how much is enough? And I love the fact that, the church is on the front foot, speaking to this, saying, hey, people, pull back. Excess isn't where it's at. Enough is enough. And I'm hearing the same message from young people as well, right? And what we're actually seeing within, millennials, within Gen Z, in the younger population, we're seeing an interest in a move away from capitalism. We're seeing interest in socialism. I did a charity bike ride in February. We had to ride, went from Canberra to Cozzy. And when we rode through Canberra, we had to go through ANU. There was actually a stand for the Student Communist Party, right? Really front center. There's all these people. I'm thinking, wow. And one of the people I was with had just said, oh, there's actually a renewed interest in communism amongst young people. Why is that? I think maybe it's a little bit defeatist. Maybe it's like, hey, we're never going to get a house. We're never going to, this hasn't worked for us, right? Well, I think it was the boomers and and some others that got the best run at the whole, insatiable economic growth drive. Young people, their voices are starting to say, hey, you know what? We want enough is enough. Enough is enough. We want to do things differently. And I think what's it's coming from is a recognition of this new understanding of what a rich life looks like. what wealth actually looks like. And I love the work of Sahil Bloom, who says, when we talk about wealth, when I say, are you wealthy? We instantly think, what's our bank account like? What home do we have? What car do we have? And what he says is, yeah, that's what we focus on, but there are other types of wealth. There are things like time wealth. If you can wake up in the morning and have some autonomy about what you do that day, that's a gift, isn't it? That's a rich form of life. You're privileged. If you have strong mental wealth, if you get to engage in things that stimulate you, that you feel like you're making a difference with, that you're contributing, wow, that's a pretty wealthy life, isn't it? What about physical wealth? Right? If you have vitality, if you have your physical health, right? What price would you put on that? Because I can tell you, if I'm 55, I try and keep active in that. I know other 55 people. If someone said, I'll give you $2 billion if you swap spots with them, I wouldn't take it. Right? My health is worth more than that. Right? Social wealth, people that you connect with. So here's the point. What we need to maybe start flipping things around, not with financial wealth being our go-to idea of wealth, but maybe that's what he says, Sahil Bloom, and I love this perspective, is that financial wealth doesn't actually determine your happiness at all, but it can enable it if you use it to invest in these things, the greater forms of wealth. And yet, what do? We tend to sacrifice all the others for the gain of the middle one. And at the end of our life, we give all of that away for all of those other things back again. Right? We need to wake up. Right? This is this whole idea, and I think young people are waking up to this. I'm amazed, how many of our graduates say, I don't want a full-time job. Jen, the education students, good, high-powered some of our top graduates even, I don't want to work full-time. Because I get to do this and do that, and I go to the beach on Fridays, and this is a different paradigm. I always thought you just get out there, knuckle down, save, get a house. It's a different era, right? So we're hearing this voice come from the young people as well. So I'm going to start wrapping up soon, but enough is enough. I actually sense, this is where I'm arriving at, this whole idea of enough, the concept of enough. I think that the world is getting quite receptive to exploring what does abstemiousness look like, and how might it actually be this really powerful promoter of health and well-being, and benefit not just people but also the planet in the process. And so, how would we go about exploring it? What would it look like? And I've actually titled this, these surprising strategies for discovering enough. Coming from the well-being literature, gratitude is this fascinating practice. You see, what gratitude does is shift your focus as quick as that from what you don't have to what you do have. So can you see that in that one instant, you just move from deficit to abundance, what you don't have to what you do have? That changes everything. And I could go paper after paper showing the value of people practicing gratitude, right? Gratitude meditations, all these sorts of things. Gratitude keeps coming to the front as this powerful remedy for discovering enough. Giving. Isn't this an interesting one? Giving. How do you discover enough by giving? What is tithing about? Tithing is teaching your brain that there's enough, right? And I've always tithed. And I've got by just fine on 90% or less of what I earn. It's a conditioning. There's something powerful about this practice of giving. By giving, we do receive, right? It teaches us there's enough. Time out. I'm intrigued by this one greatly, because sometimes we just need to pull back. We actually need to push pause and just recalibrate. And I believe that this is one of the profound wisdoms of the idea of a Sabbath. Right? And in fact, if you look at the wording of the Sabbath as a commandment, right? God knows we're not good at following through on stuff unless he sort of writes it in heavy letters. And what's the tone of it? It says, hey, you know what? One day a week, don't work. And don't make anyone else work either. Right? This is just, it's like a pushback against capitalism, isn't it? Right? And consumerism. Right? Enough. And not just with what you buy and stuff. Enough work, right? Don't be a workaholic. Don't be working like, 24/7 the whole time. Don't chase that. It's, one day a week, pause button, time out, enough. This will teach you what enough looks like. I'm with this quick, but the whole idea of identity, why are we drawn to consumerism? What is it about it? And you know what? It's like we are trying to cover up an inadequacy that we have, right? It makes us feel better to acquire stuff. And you go right back to the original story, Adam and Eve, right? They go that path, instantly they feel naked. Instantly they feel like I'm lacking something. And so they fabricate with their own hands something to try and cover their nakedness. And I wonder to what extent, our pursuit, our consumerism is actually this trying to mask this inadequacy that we feel within ourselves. And so, where do we discover that sense of identity where we have worth despite, irregardless of the things we have? And obviously faith traditions have a lot to speak into that space. So I want to leave you with a question, because this is the question I've been wrestling with lots. And that is, what's your enough? What's your enough? What would it look like? And I think this is a really fascinating question, and I've been really challenged by it. And what our plan is this. We want to try and create an enough movement. And so I'm currently writing a book at the moment. This is the book, not the cover. That was AI generated, so I don't know what the publishing house will actually do. But a manifesto for the well-being of people and the planet. Enough. And what we're looking at doing is actually not just doing a book, but a documentary on it. So we're trying to do some fundraising at the moment with Jim Lounsbury to actually explore this whole idea of enough. And I've just there's a whole lot of other tangents we could have gone out here, but I think the world would be really receptive to this sort of message right now. And what we'd love for people to explore is, what's your enough? And what might that look like, and what domain of your life? Right? We're not just talking about necessarily our materialism, the physical things that we own, but what would enough look like? And so I want to say, watch this space, because what we would love to see is how do people respond to this and research this? What would be their interest? If we've already started creating the website, but if people are able to present and write about what their enough might look like, what their manifesto might look like, and analyze that, what are the themes that keep emerging here? What sort of engagement could we get with a movement like this? And so, once again, watch this space. But more importantly, if you have ideas, we're all here. It is, because as I said, I feel like this is sitting within the swimming pool, the pool of well-being, but there are so many lanes. And I know that, there are a whole range of different expertises here. So if you've got something you go, hey, you haven't thought about this, or hey, I can add to this, then please come and see us, because I'd love to hear more about that. And with that, I would like to say thank you so much for attending today. It's been a joy to have you here. And I would love to challenge you to, as you just to reflect on, what would enough look like for me? And what's one thing that I might do to be able to engage enough in my own life? Thank you, friends.